It remains dry in much of the southeast U.S., but with rain yesterday and this morning in South Florida, it looks like we may have a potential pattern shift to bring more rain to the rest of the southeast. Improvements may be right around the corner. Jeff, Haley, and I will dig into the data and the forecasts and bring you up to date on our current thinking in the November edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Jeff, go ahead and get us started.
Thanks, Todd. Let's start off with the 30-day past precipitation, and we see fairly variable rainfall amounts across the southeast. We have seen over 2 inches in those yellow shaded areas across the central Gulf Coast, parts of South Florida and coastal South Carolina, but most areas have seen less than 2 inches, with some areas in the blue shades showing less than a half inch in the last 30 days. And this lack of rainfall shows even better on the departures. Here we see most of the southeast showing deficits of at least 2 inches, with parts of Alabama, North Georgia, into the Carolinas and Virginia showing that darker orange shade, and even some red there showing deficits of 3 to 4 of more than 4 inches over the last 30 days. With a dry October into November, how have we been looking as far as departures overall since 2023? Well, still showing positive values in several spots across the region. But the recent dry weather here this fall has been diminishing the modeled wetness we had in spring and summer. And so with the recent dry weather, the stream flows are starting to show it. Lots of orange and red dots there showing below normal stream flows across the southeast, especially in the headwater basins. And though we are coming out of the time of year when stream flows are the lowest, with the dry weather, we are exceptionally low. And we see it here best on the southeast 28-day average runoff duration hydrograph, which is dry from stream flow for the time period. The time period that we are in this is the lowest stream flows of the year. The current stream flows are even lower than that, shown by the black line there, dipping into the tan and brown range of well below normal stream flows. And so all this dry weather has expanded the drought, of course. We really have seen a rapid spread with the southeast region going from roughly 1% of the area in drought to more than 50% of the area is in at least D1 drought, with almost 10% in extreme drought now. This is concerning, of course, and will make this wet season even more critical in places. But Todd will talk more on that later, as the forecast might have some good news on the drought front. More to come, like I said, here shortly. And as I said, we're in the week 46, so now just getting to the point where we see that the jet stream get a little more active, and we tend to see more frequent rainfall events as seen here in the flood climatology. We typically tend to pick up here in late November and the end of the year. And with the end of the year, we can pretty much close out the tropical season here, or close to it, and we see that we have had some events in week 47 and 48 when we look at tropical events since 1960 that have affected the southeast. So not completely ready to close the book on the season, but thankfully getting close to closing out 2023. And overall, it was a pretty light year for the southeast, but not for the Atlantic. 20 total storms in the Atlantic so far, but only 2 affected the southeast region. That was Idalia and Ophelia. And neither of these produced widespread significant flooding for our region. Indeed, a quiet year, but will it be a quiet week ahead or even a quiet winter? So we'll see. Haley and Todd will talk more on the upcoming forecast.
For most of the southeast, weather through the short term will remain relatively low-key. However, the low off the southeast coast of Florida did bring torrential rainfall and strong winds to the southern portion of the peninsula yesterday and into this morning. Moving forward into the remainder of today, though, that low just east of the Florida coast will continue to put down rain over the state, with some of that rain making it to the coastlines of the Carolinas and into southeastern Georgia. Looking into tomorrow, that low in the Atlantic will continue to bring rain to the southeast coast. Meanwhile, a cold front draped from the upper Midwest down into the southern plains starts to move southeastward. There could be some areas that receive rainfall from this front, particularly northern Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. However, as the front moves further southeast on Saturday, it starts to dry out and rain chances decrease as you move further south. Behind this front, high pressure briefly will take control to finish out the weekend. Heading into the work week, though, the weather starts to become more active again. Rain chances return as the high pressure moves east and a strong low pressure system sets up to our west over the plains. We start to see our highest rain chances of the period early Tuesday into early Wednesday with the system moving through the region. As of this recording, the forecast 24-hour rainfall totals over the southeast range between half an inch to around an inch and a half. Getting into Wednesday, the system is on its way out of the region, taking any associated rainfall with it. High pressure begins to nudge into the southeast, with dry weather returning to the area. Here is the 7-day total rainfall forecast from WPC, and outside of the Florida Peninsula, most of this rainfall is associated with that early week system. Looking more into the long term, the Climate Prediction Center has highlighted at least the southern portions of the southeast as looking for wetter than normal conditions.
Thanks, Haley. I know that this graphic is almost a week old, but it continues the pattern of seeing a shift in the overall weather pattern to a wet one. Haley's forecast hints at wetter times to come, and the Climate Prediction Center's week 3 to 4 week forecast, which takes us into December, continues that trend. But it doesn't end there. CPC's monthly forecast for December, which was released this morning, bodes well for continuing relief for those in drought conditions right now, but it is not for great for those in deep South Florida that has just seen recent heavy rainfall. Overall, with dry conditions over the rest of the southeast the last 30 days, rainfall will be welcome for a while in the southeast. We are officially in an El Niño, and that is likely to continue through the winter into the spring based on current forecasts. And as you can see from the graphic on the left, in a typical strong El Niño year, the southeast U.S. is typically pretty wet. So basically, it has been a waiting game to see when that pattern will set up and bring us more rain. One possible reason for the delay could be the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. Without going into too much detail, the PDO can be positive or negative. The PDO can impact weather patterns in the U.S., and in years that we have had strong El Niño, even if the PDO is negative. We happen to be in a negative phase right now, and that has coincided with the La Niña we have seen for the last few years. The PDO remains negative, but as equatorial surface water temperatures have increased, and we have seen much warmer than normal temperatures spread across that area, the El Niño may begin to overwhelm that negative PDO. This year, it looks like it is taking a little more time to impact our long-term weather patterns. One year that looks similar to that was 1972 and 73. In that year, we had a negative PDO, and that eventually was overwhelmed by the El Niño and a very wet winter in the southeast. While the long-term negative PDO likely started back in 2004, we also had an El Niño in 2015, which brought us much rain in the southeast. Those graphics from the USGS on the right, Jeff showed one earlier. The top one from the years 1972 and 73 show we were much below normal as we began the winter. But by the end of that time frame, by the end of the winter, we had been very wet. The one on the bottom, which shows the current, which Jeff showed earlier, does show us in a very similar pattern where we were very dry before we started that winter. The seasonal outlook was released this morning from the Climate Prediction Center, and the December, January, and February outlook, which leans heavily towards a wet forecast in the whole southeast. The dark green is in the 60 to 70% range for above normal. This means there is little to no chance of below normal rainfall for this period. The models are very confident that we'll be above normal, and we still have a 33% chance of being near normal. By the end of February, I would expect all of our drought to be taken care of, and these WROs will be taking a much different outlook based on maybe how wet we are. And finally, the March through May forecast keeps the southeast wet, just with not as much confidence. If this happens, the southeast should be in good shape, water resource-wise, going into next summer. And so, the bottom line, in the short term, It continues to stay dry across most of the area, but it does look like there's a hint of wetter weather in the weeks ahead. So we'll have to see how we do in that transition time. In the long term, El Nino is moderate to strong and should stay that way. And what that means for our winter, as we've talked about, is that it should be very active, and we're expecting an above normal amount of flooding through the winter and into the spring. We will do our next recording of the Water Resources Outlook on December 21st. And so you have a great Thanksgiving and a great month, and we will talk to you then.